The talk that you're seeing today is Making Things Better the Dead Cow Way with Joe, Dildog, Mudge, and Death Veggie. A couple things that we need to get out of the way real quick. Do stop by level 2 and make sure you stop by and give the vendors a little love before you leave. And we do have the Black Hat Arsenal on level 2 as well. So I introduced the stars of the show to you. Here you go.
So leave the far one blank.
What?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. This is the Cult of the Dead Cow Talk. He's going to sit there. Thank you. And I'm very excited about this. I've been waiting a long time for this, at least 3 years. And I've never been on stage with Mudge or Mr. Death Vegetable's formal name before, so quite excited about that. And we have again Chris Rue, Dildog. So just to set the stage here a little bit, I want to explain. It's not obvious why somebody would want to write a book about guys that were really famous 20 years ago. But it's worth it because these guys go all the way back to before the web was in use, and they're still around, and they've been through these amazing evolutions, completely different phases. It's funny when I've been talking to people. Some people say like, CDC. When I first started hacking, I used BO, and it was awesome. And somebody else is a little older, say, oh yeah, like the first text files I ever saw were CDC, and it just keeps going. And not even everybody in CDC knows all the interesting things that they got up to over the years. But I think it's really important now as the tech industry appears to have lost a bit of its moral bearings to go back and learn from people who are really good at critical thinking, who are trying to do good for the world, and who are willing to explore new areas where they didn't have expertise but keep their core values. So without further ado, I'm just going to sit over there and I'm going to talk to these amazing gentlemen. And we'll have time for Q&A at the end. If you go to the mics, it is recorded, so be aware of that. Use your handles if you want. Thanks a lot. So to begin with, Mr. Vegetable.
Dr. Vegetable? Herr Dr. Professor Vegetable?
For the first time, will you tell the assembled masses what your actual name is and what you do for a living?
Don't do it. It's really weird, man. It's weird. I spent 30 plus years, finally honed instincts to avoid saying this, but my name is Luke Benfi. I am the head of operations and information security at Cloud IQ Limited in the UK.
So there you have it. It's on the record. So now that we can call you Luke, tell us about your early interest in CDC. How did you find out about them? What did you think of them? And what was the short version of what the culture was like at the time back in the early 1990s?
I mean, this actually goes back to the late 80s, but it was I was the weird kid in a small town, didn't really have anybody I could relate to. I didn't really think that there would be anybody out there like me. And then I started to find, BBSs. I actually, in a visit with a cousin out in California, he gave me a floppy disk that had some early issue of Frack on it. This would have been like 87 or 88. And then I started calling around BBSs. I would see, references of the Cult of the Dead Cow because they'd been around since '84, and other groups, and then start calling other boards, start exchanging messages with people, and then eventually, because I was also into phone phreaking and nascent computer hacking, mostly to be able to call other bulletin boards to get to global out dials and things. I would set up teleconferences for CDC members, and eventually someone sponsored me to join. But for me, because these were the people that had been there before me, and I was like, oh my God, I've seen your work forever. So it was really, I felt extremely honored to be invited to join.
So in addition to the often very funny text files, frequently profane text files that were brilliantly marketed and circulated widely on the semi-underground, CDC also brought us the Modern Hacking Convention, which
Yes.
Began as XmasCon and was cleverly shortened to HoHoCon because it was over Christmas break. Tell us what it was like going to HoHoCon.
I mean, it would, compared to this, it was unrecognizable, or even DEF CON nowadays. Imagine like just some random motel in either sometimes out near the airport, the airport Marriott in Austin, Texas, or something. Often, they had no idea that hackers were coming because drunk fucks who would arrange it would be like, oh, it's a computer enthusiasts convention.
That's the guy's handle. By
Yeah,
the
drunk
way.
fucks. No. Jesse Dryden. So one result of that is that we could never have it in the same hotel twice because it was crazy. I mean, you have kids drunk. There are great stories like the hotel manager like running up to Jesse and be like, they're burning a Bible in the parking lot. Like, they just didn't know what they were getting into. But it was, there had been conferences before, but those were pure parties, whereas this was the first one that both invited not just hackers, but people from law enforcement and things like that, and had speakers. They actually had presentations on either cultural things or specifically hacking things, et cetera.
$6 million man, UFOs.
$6 million man, UFO, yeah.
So, Mudge, you went to at least one HoHoCon, right?
Yeah, I was at not always the first ones, but at least the second one.
I think you were in 93 and maybe...
A little earlier, even with White Knight and Omega and everybody else brought me on. Yeah,
All right, so-
I was there for the $6 million man UFO. That was brilliant.
Yeah.
So as brief, I remember that now. So as brief background, the CDC started in Lubbock, Texas, home of Buddy Holly, and probably more relevantly, Texas Tech.
And more relevant, CDC.
And then there was this influx of people from Boston, including actually all three of these guys. There was people who were there in college, people who were from there, and it started out as kind of like the liberal arts wing of the Hacker Underground, and then actual serious tech people came to HoHoCon, and some of them got sucked into CDC, including ultimately 4 members of the Loft, including both of these two gentlemen. So let's talk a little bit about the Loft, which probably most people have heard of, but Mudge, alias Peter Zatko, how did you come across the Loft?
It turns out that I had ended up getting most of the Loft guys their first daytime jobs. Brian Oblivion.
USA?
No, Brian Oblivion had worked in like Store 24s beforehand, and brought him over to BBN, and White Knight over at Videologic and all that. I started hanging around these folks, and I liked them, so I wanted to do nice things for them. And we're all technically like-minded, and they started to invite me to certain areas. And the Loft, kind of had morphed. It was just a place where people were storing equipment and some other stuff. But what attracted me was these things called security advisories were just starting to come out. It was the whole movement of full disclosure, and you got the ability to literally bring data to the table, scare the shit out of folks, and get big companies to move and respond to it. And that was extremely, powerful, and it was inspiring. And I kind of had a vision for it, and the Loft guys, liked that and, glommed onto it. And, the rest is history, as they say. And here we all are at a 40,000 people attended conference.
So, all right. So the big change comes with Windows 95, TCP/IP
Yes.
going into Windows, which wasn't exactly ready for it
All in
in a
user
lot of
space.
ways. CDC member Serdistic put out Back Orifice 21 years ago at DEF CON.
Yep.
And then Microsoft used that as an opportunity to upsell. It's like, well, there's nothing to worry about. But if you're really, really concerned, you can buy our brand spanking new Windows NT, Windows 2000.
Yeah.
And
Because that's totally secure.
because that's totally secure. And
Because it's
and-
not Unix.
And
Yeah.
Bill Dog, alias Christian Rue, you probably figured at the time, well, that's more secure, so we just let it ride, right? Is that what you think?
Take their word for it. They know what they're doing.
Yeah.
I had already started looking at the early betas of Windows 2000 when they were starting to make those claims. Obviously, having played with Back Orifice, and when we noticed that a lot of the techniques that the original Back Orifice was using would not necessarily port cleanly over to Windows 2000, it made sense to try to see how much of that we could build for what would become the next generation of server class operating systems from Microsoft. And it turned out that just about all of the functionality that you could, do with Windows 95, you could do with 2000, despite the fact that you didn't necessarily have administrative access. You didn't really need it. The Windows API was so rich that you could get away with just about anything imaginable without even having an admin account. So, you know,
It's a feature.
it was pretty much baffling to me that, you know, you could do things like, you know, launch a process that opens up the process space of another process and then allocates memory in it, copies itself into that process, and then basically disappears from the process table. I mean, and it just continues to run as a thread of like explorer.exe. The fact that any of that was even possible was so baffling that I just had to try to figure out how to, you know, what APIs could I get my hands on? It was just so rich. You know, getting them to acknowledge that there were security vulnerabilities because of the sort of lack of controls they had at the time was the reason really for BO2K.
They also egged us onto it because
That's
they
true.
came out and said our passwords are uncrackable. It would take hundreds of millions of years, so we wrote Loftcrack. To
Right.
demonstrate it takes about 48 hours. And then they said that buffer overflows don't work in Windows,
Yeah.
which we just never understood what the hell they were talking about.
There were advisories for all of this.
Yeah, and then they even came over and offered the Loft source code to Windows NT. And this was Karan Khanna and Paul Leach.
Yeah.
And you know, we looked at them, we're like, we don't need the source code, and I bet you want us to sign an NDA, don't you?
Yeah,
They're like,
yeah.
oh, you're on to us. Yeah, so it was this weird sort of game where we really felt encouraged to be like you're gonna play cat and mouse with us? This is great. You're engaging us, a 4-person, 5-person shop
I mean, there's also
on a grand scale.
the back and forth where, you know, we came out with BO2K and then
Yep.
they came out with like that's not a problem because this and this, and then we just had a point by point rebuttal, and you know.
So, all
was
right,
fun.
let's talk about like the sort of the social dynamic at the time. Now, Loft, you know, even Loft, which was essentially good cop to CDC's bad cop.
Right.
You know, even then, you guys were using handles, you know, rather than your real names. It was still pretty dicey to publicly point out holes in people's products.
Yeah.
We had lots of lawsuits trying to come after us. We had the FBI sent at one point. This was RSA. It was called Security Dynamics at the time, retroactively named. You know, we're all friends with Ramir and Edelman, Rivest Shamir and Edelman.
Yeah.
It got pretty nasty.
So-
So you didn't always want your name out there.
So, tell me, Chris, like why put out BOTK under? You were actually working for the Loft. You're the first paid employees.
Yeah, technically. Yeah.
Why put out?
Yeah, Loft paid him to create it.
Why put out BO2K as CDC with the big villain act and the tossing the CDs and the costumes and the rapping, rather than just do something formal and proper through Loft?
That's a good question. CDC had the original BO.
on the brand,
Right.
man.
So the brand was a CDC brand. There was enough overlap in the two organizations that it made sense for me to spend my time doing that because it kind of elevated both organizations in some way. It was good publicity for the Loft, but you know, it was being driven by CDC people. To some extent, CDC almost acted like a marketing department for Loft in that way. You know, so for me, because sort of having one foot on each iceberg or whatever, it was a good opportunity for me to get up, do something extremely technical in front of an audience that I might not have been able to command otherwise. You know, and that was it raised the level of discussion.
I remember the conversation.
It also had to turn into a media circus, though.
Yeah.
And which had
no,
advantages.
that was the fun part. You know, the
I
fun
mean, we
part was lighting up all of the media on this.
I mean, I can tell you internally, like, you know, we were viewing it as, you know, trying to make a difference, you know,
Yeah.
seeing that, you know, we had these conversations internally within the herd that, look, you know, this is a real problem, that this operating system is being pushed out to everybody, your grandmother, and marketed as like, oh, this is a safe way to engage on the internet. And it was not safe. And just getting them to, I mean, it was relatively idealist to think like, oh, we can force them to change it. But I mean, that's what we thought we could do. We thought, you know, oh, they're going to, you know, we're going to highlight these problems and they'll fix them. But what happened is we highlighted these problems and they issued a press release.
Yeah, the context here is that Windows Update did not exist at the time. You let's not pretend that Microsoft just rolled out patches all the time or even had a disclosure process. This was like once or twice a year there was a service pack or something, and maybe your bug or whatever got rolled into it. So there wasn't really a mechanism for them to deal with this. It was denial and lawsuits and that kind of thing. I got plenty of threats. Spin.
Part
so-
of why it went out of CDC rather than Loft, and we talked about this inside,
Yeah.
because we were literally paying him to do it, and we're like, well, why aren't we going to, as Loft, take some of the, accolades for the excellent work that Dylan was doing, and we realized it was an opportunity to see how if we deliver the same sort of data, but just from two different spins, from CDC, versus the Loft, because we had advisories coming out of the Loft, and here comes almost the same thing, out of CDC. Is it received differently? How difficult is it? Does it look bad? Does it look good? What's the long-lasting part? We even did a professional plugin pack, if you remember,
Loft had a
butt
plug,
plugs, right?
Yeah.
To try and say, hey, once something has an initial spin of kind of quasi-evil and questionable, can you claw it back? And the answer was no.
Yeah,
You really
nobody
couldn't.
bought the plug and pack.
The finality of the initial spin, that was a huge learning lesson for us as to, for the Loft and for CDC and for what a lot of us did, like kind of going forward, was how do you understand the information that you're presenting it and how you're initially pitching it as to what its long-lasting repercussions are going to do.
Okay, I want to move past into like the 2000s when the spotlight starts to move away. We'll come back to hacktivism, but in the meantime, let's talk about @Stake. So in retrospect, it seems kind of weird to turn like this little like hobby boutique, really cutting edge with the advisories and coordinated disclosure, pioneering all this great stuff, testifying to Congress, but then take in some venture money and try to make a buck, even if that was like the thing to do in '99, 2000. What were the sort of quickly I think one of the amazing things is you sent all these brilliant people inside big companies who had never seen ex-hackers explaining stuff. But tell me from your guys' perspective, like the highlights and lowlights of @Stake.
There's no such thing as thoughts.
I'll take the first hit on that one, which is I'm the one who pushed it in there, and on the surface it seemed like we were aligned with the VCs and that they wanted the same things that we did, and we could turn our hobby into a day job, and we liked our hobbies more than we liked our day jobs, except for him, who we were already paying, sort of stuff. And that was a really painful learning lesson. That no, we weren't really aligned. We wanted to kind of go from the garage band that had like a small amount of people who were listening and really dug it to how do we get up on the big stage? And our message might be muted. We might have to make some give and takes and stuff, but to a broader audience. And there's a lot of positives that came out of it. Almost every one of the security consultancies, for decades afterwards, can trace their lineage back there to some extent. But yeah, it was, we were a bit young, a bit naive, and there were some hard lumps there.
Yeah. For me, the highlights were the opportunity to do focused security research on things that might otherwise not have an immediate impact. I was able to start building things that eventually turned into Veracode. That the research on decompilation theory and software modeling and automated analysis and all of that binary analysis stuff, that all really started at @Stake. It was funded through there. It was originally going to be a bionic exoskeleton for consultants, who might want to be able to analyze binaries instead of by hand, by analyzing them faster using a tool. And eventually that got spun out after the acquisition of @Stake. So, for me, it was about getting the opportunity to do that research I might not be able to do otherwise. Some of the other sort of fringe things that I enjoyed were, and I say enjoyed at the time, I thought it sucked, but I had to go to Microsoft to do audits, and Microsoft was a customer of @Stake's. So I had spent the majority of my career pulling Microsoft's pants down in public, but now I was hired by them to go and pull their pants down in private, which was a strange honor. I was on the team that did the code reviews of IIS 6. So once IIS 6 came out, we did a whole ton of review on that before 7, and ASP.NET, and a bunch of other things you might be aware of. I did a bunch of those reviews with Dave Vitale and Frank Swiderski and others. Those were good moments.
Good folks.
Those were formative.
So what happens here is that the venture math doesn't really work. You don't get 100x returns from consulting, no matter how good your consulting
If you're just selling hours, you got a 1x multiple on that. So
1.5
everybody that came after @Stake learned from how we didn't succeed in that department.
But I'll just briefly mention that I think one of the great contributions is all the alums, that came out of there, including people like Alex Stamos, Katie Masouris, Window Snyder. Amazing people worked at @Stake, and sort of it validated it for other small, awesome firms at the same time. So So that's the private sector, and Veracode, is amazing legacy as well. So that's the private sector. Then we have like the nonprofit hacktivism world, where CDC also had tremendous influence. That was kind of an amazing shift. I mean, you guys were sort of like the peak of fame in InfoSec hackerdom 20 years ago, and then somebody decides to turn it up another notch. So Luke, tell us a little bit about how the whole hacktivism thing started.
Well, I mean, it was the term was sort of coined by a CDC member, Omega, who's actually here right now. He's going to be at the, we're doing a presentation at DEF CON tomorrow. We had this discussion about sort of as, hackers, as people involved in the Computer Underground, you have this power, you have this influence. So it's like, what can we do with this to try to make the world a better place? Where can we leverage this power that we have? And so one of the things that we thought about was was using that to both through the media and hopefully through some sort of like technology, but especially through media and through the influence that we've gathered through both our long history and through Back Orifice, BO2K, et cetera, our connections with the media. And a lot of this was influenced by Oxblood Ruffin, a member who joined in the mid-90s, and he had a background. He was older than the rest of us, almost all the rest of us. And he'd worked for the UN and had worked for various human rights organizations. And he came in and basically showed us a way that we'd already been looking for a way to influence, and he kind of showed us how to helped us focus our message and brought us. We appeared with Patrick Ball at DEF CON in 2001. Did a panel on how computer security can be and encryption can be leveraged to help human rights and activists within
dissident groups,
dissident groups
and
within
otherwise
restricted
repressed
regimes.
nations,
And
The State Department likes that.
good.
The State Department likes that sort of thing.
Well, they do now.
They
At the
do now.
time, it was pretty radical, and it's amazing because we're still having the same conversation now.
Yeah.
This is where the action is, like
I mean,
surveillance, counter surveillance.
There was a bunch of CDC involvement at various points with some of the folks that prosecuted Slobodan Milosevic for the crimes in Yugoslavia. If you actually go these days, if you go to the International Criminal Court of former Yugoslavia's website, they have a website where you can search through all of the cases and all the transcripts. If you go ahead and search for Cult of the Dead Cow, and it is a tremendous amount of CDC references in the Slobodan Milosevic trial and Radko Mladic and all this. It's over the last 20 years. CDC comes up a strange amount in these proceedings. I was baffled almost.
It was really weird to see the footage because Slobodan Milosevic acted as his own lawyer.
Yeah.
And you see this this footage, and he's like,
Slobo.
"Tell me more about this dead cow cult." And it was just like, "Oh my God, this horrible genocidal dictator knows who we are." So I don't know if I like that.
We're gonna end up in a mass grave.
So with the sort of hacktivism wing of CDC, there was influence on Tor because they tried to do a privacy protecting browser, and it didn't take off hugely, but it was enough that Dingledine and friends at Tor said, you know what, maybe we should bundle a browser in here too.
I mean, I think it was sort of like a proto-Tor browser in some ways. Like it was, we were trying to do the same thing, but the project kind of collapsed under the weight of personalities. But then Tor took that concept and ran with it. I mean, I don't know if they used any of the code base. I'm not sure about that, but
There'll be some of it off of the Navy's original work on the onion routing stuff.
okay,
Exactly.
yeah, that makes sense.
That was initially a government-sponsored, again, to allow people to communicate in denied areas.
Right. All right. So
Dingledine and
talk
I
a little bit
both
just
went
briefly
to
on
MIT at
the
the same time.
definitions of hacktivism. So, I mean, to me, one of the even CDC had a couple different definitions, but one of them, the one that resonates with me the most, was security work in service of human rights. And compare that to where you think hacktivism has gone in the last 10 years.
Well, I mean, I think that you certainly have hacktivism with that in mind is still happening. And I would certainly, I think that definition is a completely valid one. The question then becomes what your definition of human rights is. So is it focused to just governmental, interaction with humans? Is it civil liberties under a governmental thing? Or is it actually also applicable to private companies, private organizations? And some of us believe that it is, some of us believe that it isn't. I mean, there are still philosophical disagreements within CDC about what sort of actions are ethically valid. Some people believe that things like denial of service or web defacement is not applicable as a legitimate means of protest. Other people believe that it is a legitimate piece of form of protest. So these are things that are still going on. I mean, I don't know. I don't necessarily think that the kinds of hacktivism have changed radically so much as the scale has changed radically as the internet and access to the internet has penetrated and spread much more widely to people around the globe.
Well, you have break-ins. You have people hacking and dumping stuff.
Yes, doxing, et cetera.
Either for moral reasons or pretend moral
But I mean,
reasons.
that always happens. I mean, it happened. I mean, that's not new. Yeah.
You got to admit that some of the early hacktivism was reverse activism. It was people who had hacked a website and then figured out what their cause was after.
Yes.
I mean, there was a lot of that at the
that
beginning.
still happens.
But that inspired people. That inspired people to be like, well, wait a minute.
I figured out how to
Free
get into
Palestine,
Sony.
whatever.
Wait, what
It's
has
just
Sony done wrong? Or,
The opportunity to use that to spread a message became more clear once people started doing it, even if it was mostly about the hack and a little bit less about the message at the beginning. It really caught on as an opportunity to change minds when, you break into something and post your screed. There's going to be a lot of attention on that. The media picks up on it.
use your skills for good.
Governments started to pick up on that too.
Yeah.
You saw doxing of Surkov, allegedly by the Ukrainians, against the Russian disinformation stuff years back. I mean, you saw the same sort of
So it's interesting to see
Syrian
that
electronic army.
That feedback cycle of the media and hacking, starting that far back.
Yeah, I mean, you see techniques that were sort of pioneered 20 years ago now being used in basically what's cyber warfare today. I mean, you have people and governments doing this to each other in different ways.
I also think that CDC, correct me if you disagree, but I think that we were the first hacking group to really try to leverage the media to get messages out there. That sort of, we had a list of contacts of people that we would talk to, and we would send out our global domination update to let them know what was going on, or both within what we were doing and also things that we thought were important. And so we would send this list out to a couple hundred people, a couple hundred names, and then some of them would come back and hey, tell me more about this. Let's talk about
that
this.
was definitely unique because it was like. At the time, some other
Mr.
hackers,
Propaganda, man, I got to do my job.
Yeah.
some other hackers, were like, either worried about arrest or they were like soul hackers. They were like, like the soul surfer going off by himself. Never mind the crowds, never mind the adulation. You guys were like, well, there's a camera. Here we are.
Yeah.
And it confused the heck out of folks because I mean, most of the time they were like, hackers don't want to be known and everything. And then here's someone that's just like that. Yeah, here's our contact information. Reach out to us. People are like, what's going on here? There's a little bit of value to that.
All right, so
It's because
I
half
wanna,
the hack was what you do to the media after. It's
I think
how you
it's
present
Culture
it.
jamming. I mean,
Yeah, it is. It's culture
CDC
jamming.
was never just technical. It was always like this aspect of, I would compare, my vision of CDC is more like the Yes Men. That's what I that was. I mean, the Yes Men didn't exist yet when we were doing that, but that it's the same. It's a parallel. So
And I joined it because I was a fan of the Yippies and Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin. And
I thought it was because you liked my butt.
Well, still do.
all right, so one of the, I think, positive messages of CDC is that you can have like a really big impact in a small group in a variety of settings, within a big company, in a small company, not at any company or in the government. And when I was interviewing you guys for the book, I mean, Mudge had a great explanation for why he wanted to work for the government, and Chris had a great explanation for why he thought he could make the most impact outside of the government. So could you briefly restate, your reasoning? Mudge, you want to go first?
Sure. I had reached out to try and build sensitivities, all throughout the lifetime. I was training folks at NSA, at I4C4, in ex-TAO, et cetera. I was reaching out to folks in the executive office of the branch. And the goal was, And I was actually even going out to West Point and teaching the cadets and stuff during this time period. And I wanted to build sensitivities. I wanted to influence the future leaders. I wanted to have, discussions. I didn't want them to be afraid of some boogeyman and give the boogeyman more power that they deserved and like kind of set them up to go after stuff, and kind of like, choose us as the opportunistic bad guy to take down, and like, because that's not how it works. So after, we had done that throughout that entire time, and when DARPA reached out to me, and I had already, I knew folks inside, they knew me, there weren't these sort of scared aspects, I saw that the government was making what I thought were a lot of missteps and a lot of mistakes. And in particular in research, I was like, this isn't really novel anymore. There was a lot of what I considered wasteful spending, duplicative stuff of things that, we were looking at the conferences, that our colleagues were doing, but yet these were big contractors getting hundreds of millions of dollars and not being able to pull them off. And I was like, no, I'm drawn to environments that are complex and that I don't understand. And I have to go inside and I have to figure them out from as many angles, and I've got to try and fix them. That is my OCD. My wife is like, yes, that is your OCD. So whether it was like, being bit by the VCs, and later, I start to like, involve with private equity and everything else. And now I've got this deck to try and like help everybody else not make the mistakes, that I do, whether it's the government where I'm like, you're making poor, uninformed choices. I see it from the government contractor. I saw it from the loft. I saw it from, an advisor. I'm going to go in as a general, essentially. They give me the opportunity. I've got to do it. And hopefully, that opens doors. I mean, one of the things that Joseph said in the questions was like, with Congress and everything, how you did that and how that wasn't enough. And I was like, well, actually, it was never about being enough. It was about opening doors so everybody else could do it. And until you build those relationships, you can't let somebody else go through and take it further. So yeah, the Congress stuff, DARPA, CFT, it was all about like opening the floodgates, letting the diversity come in, and expanding, the influence and the sensitivities between two groups that I don't think should ever see eye to eye.
So CFT is so cool that, particularly for this audience, that I think you ought to talk a little bit more about it. I didn't know of any prior way for a hacker, lone hacker, small group of hackers they're not Beltway bandits. It's the polar opposite. How the hell do you deal with the Pentagon? How do you do that stuff? Just tell me a little bit about
CFT. So CFT was this thing called Cyber Fast Track. And when I went into DARPA, I realized that we in this community for the past 20, 30 years, at the hacker conferences, DEF CONs, HoHo cons and stuff, finally had a seat at the table. And one of the things that I saw was you had to be this huge company. We talked about this at the loft. Wouldn't it be great if we could get some sort of government grant to do the work that Dill wanted to do on the UDS, the
Undeveloped
Studio,
which is what turned into Veracode
and stuff, or Slint, and what I was doing. And it wasn't. The barrier to entry was huge. You had to have war chests of money. You had to do proposals that took months and months and months on end. It was like it was an old boys network. And when I went in there, I brought in a bunch of folks, and I said, how do we change this? And by the way, I didn't think that the government contractors at the time were doing innovative research. And you know what makes people do innovative research? The fear of your lunch being eaten and bringing in competition. So essentially what it did was I got taxpayer money allocated that you could do a proposal. If you tried to solve a government problem, you were immediately rejected. This was, again, sort of like understanding I want you to solve a problem in your community that matters to you. My job is to look at it from the government side and see if there's overlap and see if both communities are going to benefit from it. You try and solve somebody else's problems that you don't know, you're not going to do a great job, and you're just doing it for the money. You try and solve a problem that you're passionate about and that bothers you and that you really have lived, you're going to solve that fucking problem. And what I did was it was a hack that didn't really involve computers. So government processes normally were like 6 months to 8 months to like get an award and get a contract. And I said, I'm going to hack the government process, government contracting, the federal acquisitions regulations. So the average time you could submit a proposal, the proposal was all of like 6-7 pages. There was a template. I'd get it, I'd read it. You were on contract and funded and working, and you could be an individual or a small duo came out of it. Trail of Bits came out of it, HackRF. The Jeep hacks were that Charlie Miller did, which kind of opened that up, were all out of Cyber Fast Track. 3 days turnaround time. That was the entire government contract. 1-page commercial, when you owned all the rights to it. Go leverage that against the VCs because now you've turned it into an engineering problem, not a research problem, sort of set up. And yeah, that was my hack inside the government. That was like, I think I figured out this complex system and I want to shake it up a bit.
That's awesome. Really amazing stuff. All right, Chris. Why did you not, the government's got all the brains, it's got all the money. Why not go work for the government to do your cool stuff?
My goals were different. Specifically, it was less about opening doors. I had algorithms that I wanted to have applied to basically as many programs as I could. I had developed a system for automating the analysis of binaries, finding vulnerabilities, and helping them get fixed. Initially, I had built this as an automated decompilation system, however. So the government interest that came to me was not about fixing the world's problems and security. It was about reverse engineering code from wherever it happened to have showed up from. When I got invited to present my work at the NSA and the CIA and other places, it invariably turned into, can this decompile this thing, or can this decompile, centrifuge firmware, or whatever it was. I didn't want to see something that I had spent 8+ years, my baby, basically disappear into the bowels of a classified institution and not being applied to where I felt the problems were. The government systems, despite being classified, were still dependent on the public sector. They were still dependent on Microsoft operating systems and Oracle databases and everything else that needed a good, dose of automation to find the flaws. The one thing that AtStake proved to me was that you can put all the smartest people you know in one place, and there won't be enough of them to fix the security problems out there. It was not a person problem; it was a problem of scale. So I wanted to address that with as much automation as I could, and it was either it get buried in, some kind of government classified thing, scanning, missile code or something, or we aim it at every single binary in the public sector, period. And I think, the impact of that and spawning any level of competition in the space of automating security vulnerability analysis, I'm proud to have had anything to do with that. I felt it was the right move at the time, despite the fact that, the CEO of AtStake turned out to eventually be the CEO of In-Q-Tel, which was, Chris Darby. There was a lot of gravity to have what I was doing kind of eventually go down the government rabbit hole. We had to pretty much consciously pull that back and be like, no, this is meant for the world to see, not just for, a privileged few.
All right, I want to sort of touch on another. So, one of the things that was interesting to me in the research was the internal debates. That there was good faith discussions within CDC on some really tricky stuff, and some of the calls are not obvious. I mean, that's hence the debate. Might wind up 60-40 on something or another. But I think one of the more ones that resonates. One of the things that resonates is the debate over WikiLeaks, which changed as WikiLeaks changed. But also had one of your members involved. Who's this Jake Applebaum
That's
guy?
on you.
And what do you think of WikiLeaks now?
I thought the original stated goal of WikiLeaks was a laudable one. I think it quickly became a personal sort of ego trip of Prof. Julian Assange, who we had all known from back in the day. He used to hang out on Pound Hack on IRC, begging for exploits. Even when I thought the goal of WikiLeaks was laudable, Julian was always an asshole. I mean, and he was always an asshole. But it was just he's an asshole doing something that's good. But then it was oh wait, no, now maybe not. The stuff with Jake is he was somebody who on paper seemed like he was working on good projects. He was involved in all these other sort of areas, and it was only sort of as time went by, we're oh, you're not really doing this stuff, are you? You're just getting your name attached to things. And then when the revelations about his actions towards women and also harassment of men, et cetera, came out, it was no, this is not somebody that we at all want to have associated with CDC.
It didn't share our values.
Yeah, no, exactly. Do not share our values. Anathema to our values.
Only person, jettisoned.
Only person CDC has ever kicked out.
All right. I want to talk a little bit more about the present day before we turn to questions in a few minutes. So I know you guys get asked this a lot, but if you were doing this, if CDC, could a CDC come together now for the first time? What the heck form would it take? And what sorts of problems would it be taking on?
Oh, I'd really hope that we'd all look and say that there is one, and it's actually even larger, and it's what the CCC has continued to become and grow into. The Chaos Computing Club over in Germany, which is a worldwide sort of reach and has a very interesting and it's still like relatively autonomous sort of way, but there's people that help guide it.
Pirate parties,
The pirate parties, they're writing guidance pieces for Parliament. They're helping to pull back bad missteps from governments and other areas and educate them so they can make more informed decisions. They run some really good congresses. I mean, that's what I had always wanted to model the loft off of. I just didn't understand that essentially Lopin folks, had made millions of bucks and were willing to spend it all on an altruistic thing, and we didn't have that. But CCC and CDC were, to me, like these two really, beautiful, kind of like altruistic organizations. So I think there's one out there.
Synergy.
Yeah, there's a lot of synergy there.
I mean, there's people that have the same sort of ethos and attitudes as a lot of CDC. I mean, you look at from in politics,
Within Anonymous even, or like within politics, within all kinds of things.
like the one that comes to mind for me is the
Extinction.
XPM of Iceland, Brigadier John Zotter. There are people that have those ideas and are willing to put them up on the world stage.
There's the Extinction Rebellion movement in the UK that's dealing with climate change. There's people who are looking into election security of voting machines.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
all kinds of. I mean, these people are out there.
Yeah,
And
you don't have to
hopefully-
be a group. I mean,
No,
look at
yeah,
Matt
I mean-
Blaze. Look at any of these other folks that
Exactly.
are involved in the communities that are like helping set up stuff at Hope, at DEF CON for the hacking village. You'll find a few folks that have gone into DARPA because they saw that I was able to do it, and they're trying to do the same thing because the doors are open. I mean, that's kind of what CDC was doing. CDC opened a door for me, and hopefully we've opened up doors for other people.
Oh, maybe one day somebody will run for president.
Who knows?
Psychedelic Warlord 2020. Make America K-Rad again.
You should explain to folks who haven't read the book or seen the.
All right, if you don't know this, Beto O'Rourke, who's running for president of the United States of America, was a hacker, and he was in CDC in its formative early years. He wrote a number of text files which are still online because CDC's files live on forever.
Much to his chagrin.
Can't have everything. And he left before CDC got really big, but he was an important early player in it. And I think some of his text files are silly, and some are offensive.
I mean, they're written when he's 14, 15 years old. Yeah.
Yes, he was 14, 15 years old. And I think one of them actually resonates pretty well, which is he and a friend interviewed a neo-Nazi in Texas and let the guy hang himself with his own words and posted it for all to see. And I don't think neo-Nazis were a huge issue in the late 80s in Texas, but they are now. So good for him for seeing that. And also, to his credit, he gender integrated CDC.
Yeah, it's true. He was all about diversity, even at 14 and 15. And he was all about engaging folks with disparate beliefs. And that was very much the ethos and pathos of CDC.
He was one of, there were these people that were the sort of the previous generation of CDC before I joined. So I joined in like 90, 91. And before that, so these are the people that were in the first years and who were influential upon me and influential the people who then joined the sort of the second generation. And, I would see, the stuff he was writing about, the stuff he was talking about, all this on the boards. And, this is, that was that helped influence, my own views, because as I say, I grew up in the middle of nowhere and, I don't necessarily didn't have the widest worldview. So to get these sort of other, viewpoints was very valuable in my own development.
I think one of the things that stood out about Beto O'Rourke and back in that time when I met him, and this was an important aspect of, how would you create another Cult of the Dead Cow right now, is you can do it online, but there's something about when you all actually get together and you actually meet the person and you figure out, are they really what I thought they were? And when you met Beto, it's just like, oh my gosh, this guy, this is what we are. He was very, accepting. He was very welcoming. He was very open. He was, encouraging, just a friendly guy. And same thing with Luke, and with Bill and I,
Yeah, I only talk shit about you behind your back.
But I appreciate that. That's really cool of you.
I should say that I really appreciated Beto being open about why he joined, what he got out of CDC, and sort of the valuable roles that can be played by people coming from an outsider perspective. These are the critical thinking hackers or people who don't fit in with any other sort of mass movement.
I'm impressed so many people were able to keep a secret for so long.
I think that's.
I tell you what, it was not easy. Like,
Last thing I want to ask you guys. There in Silicon Valley right now, there are these rank and file movements on a number of issues, from treatment of contractors instead of different from full-time employees, to artificial intelligence, to contracts with various government entities, including ICE, to whether or not certain companies should go back to China.
workers' rights, civil liberties, social
all
justice,
kinds of
et cetera,
really big stuff, which I have not seen in 20 years of covering Silicon Valley before. Do you see parallels in what they're doing to what you guys were doing back in the day?
Jeez.
I mean, I think to some degree, or at least spiritual parallels, philosophical parallels, and I love it. I mean, I would like to think that I would have the personal integrity to stand up if I saw that the company that I was working for was treating people in a way that I thought was unjust, or were doing something that I thought was unethical. I'd like to think that I would have the integrity to stand up against that. I mean, I think that I feel glad that I've never had to do that I've never worked for a company that I felt like, oh my God, they're doing evil things. But I'd like to think that I would, and I have tremendous amount of respect for people who do.
Yeah, the thing that I see recently happening, it doesn't get a whole lot of press in this industry, is the whole hacking and CDC thing, the whole media saturation bit, to some extent is about inspiring collective action. You have a few famous people doing something that then inspires a whole lot of other people to do those things.
To take it further,
And I'm seeing a lot more workers standing up for themselves in tech jobs that would otherwise be completely marginalized. The one that comes to mind is the video game industry. I fully support the unionization of video game developers. I wanted to write video games when I was a kid. That's why I got into kernel and assembly and all this low-level stuff. Then I got to MIT and I was about to get out and I was like, I want to go write video games for a living. Then I talked to people who really did that work and they were like, don't go back. It's a hellhole. It's a sweatshop. You're going to die. Finally, 20 years later, these people are getting around to demanding, just treatment and hours that make sense and fairness. So I think that kind of collective action, we're going to see more and more of that as tech figures out really what it wants to be.
So some of these tech companies, kind of became the establishment. They were the upstarts, and that makes me think of like CDC and some of the things that we did, because at some point the people, especially if you're radical and you're somewhat successful in your revolution, you become the establishment. And the choice as the establishment is, what sort of establishment are you going to become? And that's what we're seeing happen out there. You can be one that says, we're just going to ossify, and our rules are going to be, we just do it because that's the way. Or you can be an establishment that says, no, diversity, and we want to welcome the new changes the same way that we cause change going in there. And I think some of these big tech companies are really struggling with that right now. And I think some of these people standing up are kind of saying, hey, no, we're going to force you, I hope, to be the establishment that embraces more diversity and allows the change. And if you don't let us do it, we're going to make you do it.
You use the media, you use your megaphone that you build yourself to shift the balance of power.
And I can say that coming from, I was a director in Google, I was corporate vice president in Motorola. I saw this inside, and it's a real thing that they're dealing with, and it will be really interesting. And I have tremendous respect for the folks who are willing to fight for what they believe in.
Okay, awesome. All right, we have about 2 minutes for questions. We have a couple mics back there. So stand up and get up there and fire away.
Can't see anything.
If you would, under no obligation.
No, you're definitely under an obligation. Lock the doors.
We'll also be, we'll have the standard panel with Omega also appearing for the first time.
That'll be nice.
Under his real name, or second time under his real name, and at DEF CON on Friday at 3. Any questions?
Well, Luke should tell him about the story about the UFO release at SummerCon.
No.
Some other time.
You can leave that to Misha tomorrow.
Hacking Area 51.
Hey, we have a question.
We have a question. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Hello? Is this working? All right.
Yeah.
Hi guys. I just wanted to ask you a quick question about Julian Assange, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So from the book, I sort of interpreted that he was a somewhat legitimate hacker, although there is disdain towards him. However, here, I just heard that you guys were saying that he was asking for exploits on IRC. I just wanted to know if you could maybe sort of clarify there a little bit about what he really was from a more objective point of view.
I mean, he definitely was a legitimate hacker. I mean, he had skills. I mean,
He wrote one of the first port scanners, Strobe.
he was legit. He was legit.
He was working on the rubber hose file system, and
I mean, he was an asshole, but he was a legitimate hacker. That's not, he was not a, he wasn't a poser. He wasn't a script kiddie.
And don't read into asking for wares on IRC. I mean,
We all
wares
did it.
were the currency of the time. It turned out that Dill was, creating, I was creating, and that ended up being valuable as currency.
Traded
But-
for fun
Yeah,
because it was
tarballs of source code and wares were,
Wares were
We're not allowed to do
cards,
this, but I'm going to take one more question over there.
So are you going to vote for Beto or what?
Sorry?
So are you going to vote for Beto O'Rourke or what?
Are we going to vote for him?
I know, it's a dumb question. But.
Oh, well, I got to say, my own politics are significantly to the left of Beto's. However, I can say, you vote, political side, whatever you support, my own point of view is that he is an honest and genuine person. As I say, my politics are to his left, but when, I trust through my own experience with him that what he says, he actually believes. He's not pandering. That's actually what he believes. And so if that happens to align with what you believe, then vote for Beto O'Rourke. If it doesn't align with what you believe, then don't vote for Beto O'Rourke.
Well, he was legit while he was with you guys.
Yeah, he's legit. Yeah.
My answer is we have a private voting system where you don't have to tell people who you voted for. It's really important, and I swear by that.
Yeah.
So I'll never
That's why
tell you who I vote for. I'll tell you, who I dislike.
You've been voting for Lyndon LaRouche.
Oh, come on. Yeah, that great, that thing about putting the Queen in jail. Yeah.
But now it's the ghost of
Oh,
Lyndon
you're in
LaRouche.
England now. That's what this is about. This is about Lyndon LaRouche going against the Queen.
Not going anywhere from here. Thank you very much for coming. We
We're
really
out of time.
appreciate
We're
it.
out of time.